Girl saved millionaire's life. He starts crying when she asks for this in return. The morning sun cast long shadows across Brooklyn Bridge as Elliot Grayson, CEO of Grayson Enterprises, maintained his usual running pace. His $500 running shoes struck the wooden planks rhythmically, matching the cold precision with which he ran his billion-dollar empire. Skyscrapers loomed in the distance, monuments to his success, yet silent witnesses to his solitude. The first twinge in his chest felt like a mild discomfort. Elliot ignored it, just as he'd ignored his sister Rebecca's calls for the past 3 years. The pain returned sharper, causing him to stumble. Still, he persisted, his breathing becoming more labored with each step. Halfway across the bridge, the pain exploded like a vice gripping his heart. His legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed against the pedestrian railing. People streamed past him in both directions, tourists taking selfies, commuters with headphones firmly in place, cyclists focused on their cadence. None of them noticed the millionaire gasping for breath on the ground. A young couple walked by, lost in conversation and laughter. A mother hurried past, guiding her children while checking her phone. The mighty East River flowed beneath him, its waters catching the golden light of the setting sun, the same sun that had streamed through his office windows that morning when he'd fired a single father for a minor accounting error. Through his dimming vision, Elliot watched the crowd flow around him like a river around a stone, each person sealed within their own private bubble. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had spent years building walls between himself and others now desperately needed someone to notice him. His phone remained in his apartment, his wealth meaningless on these wooden planks. Just as his consciousness began to fade, a gentle touch on his sleeve brought him back to awareness. A small girl with bright eyes and pigtails knelt beside him, her face full of genuine concern. "Mister, are you okay?" Her voice was clear and kind, cutting through the fog of his pain. "I'm Lila," she said firmly, as if introducing herself might help him feel better. Through his haze of pain, Elliot watched as the girl's expression changed from worry to determination. She jumped to her feet, her pigtails bouncing with the movement, and ran to the edge of the bridge's walkway. "Help," she called out, her young voice carrying surprisingly far. "Please, somebody help. This man is sick." As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Elliot saw something in Lila's desperate attempts to save him, a pure, unconditional kindness he hadn't encountered in years. It was the last thing he registered before consciousness slipped away, a child's unwavering compassion contrasting sharply with the cold, impersonal world he had helped create. The moment would later mark the beginning of a transformation that would shake the foundations of his carefully constructed world, though he couldn't have known it then, lying helpless on Brooklyn Bridge, saved by the one thing his money couldn't buy: genuine human connection. If this story touched your heart, and you'd like to experience more meaningful narratives that celebrate human connection and transformation, please consider subscribing to our channel. Together, we can share stories that remind us of the power of compassion and the true value of human relationships. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of Elliot Grayson's penthouse, casting long shadows across imported marble floors. The city sprawled below like a distant kingdom. But up here in his fortress of glass and steel, the 45-year-old CEO moved through his morning routine in perfect solitude. Every surface gleamed with an almost clinical perfection, not a throw pillow out of place, not a speck of dust on any surface, just like his life, controlled, ordered, and utterly empty. His morning routine never varied. At precisely 6 a.m., he would rise from his California king bed, its Egyptian cotton sheets perfectly pressed. The master bathroom, larger than most Manhattan apartments, echoed with his solitary footsteps as he prepared for another day of building his empire. His reflection in the massive mirror showed a man who had everything and nothing all at once: steel-gray eyes that hadn't softened with laughter in years, salt and pepper hair meticulously groomed, and a jawline set with determination that had become permanent. By 7 a.m., Elliot would be reviewing market reports while his personal chef, Maria, silently placed his breakfast: egg white omelette, whole grain toast, organic green juice on the custom-made dining table meant for 12, but never used for more than one. He hadn't hosted a dinner party in 3 years, not since Catherine walked out, calling him impossible to reach, like trying to hug a wall. The penthouse itself told the story of a life dedicated to acquisition rather than connection. Award-winning art pieces adorned the walls, selected not for personal appreciation but for their investment value. The kitchen, with its state-of-the-art appliances, remained largely unused except for Maria's brief morning appearances. The media room, equipped with the latest technology, gathered dust. The guest rooms, perfectly furnished, had never welcomed actual guests. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Elliot would step into his private elevator, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. The ride down to his waiting car was silent, just as he preferred it. His driver, James, knew better than to attempt conversation during the 15-minute drive to Grayson Enterprises headquarters. The morning news played softly in the background, a mere murmur of world events that Elliot processed only in terms of market impact. The entire 50th floor of Grayson Tower belonged to him, a testament to his success and a monument to his isolation. His corner office offered panoramic views of the city he'd helped shape through countless mergers, acquisitions, and strategic eliminations of competition. The walls displayed magazine covers celebrating his business acumen, Business Leader of the Year, 40 Under 40, the man with the Midas touch, but there were no family photos, no personal mementos, nothing to suggest the office belonged to a human being rather than a corporate machine. His assistant, Mark Davis, had learned to anticipate his needs without unnecessary interaction. Reports would appear on his desk precisely when needed. Meetings would be scheduled with military precision. Calls would be screened with ruthless efficiency. The only unexpected elements in Elliot's carefully orchestrated life were the quarterly board meetings where he had to endure direct human interaction for extended periods. At day's end, Elliot would return to his penthouse, often working well into the night. The city lights twinkled below like distant stars, a reminder of the world of ordinary people living ordinary lives, a world he had long since left behind. His phone would occasionally buzz with messages from his sister Rebecca, each one ignored like the others before it. The last family photo he'd allowed himself to keep lay face down in his bedside drawer, a snapshot of happier times before the car accident that took his parents and set him on this path of relentless ambition and emotional isolation. This was the empire Elliot Grayson had built, a perfect machine of success and solitude, running with clockwork precision, devoid of warmth or genuine human connection. He had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered, though he wouldn't realize this truth until fate intervened on Brooklyn Bridge. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday evening 15 years ago. Thomas and Margaret Grayson were driving home from their 30th wedding anniversary dinner when a truck lost control on the wet highway. 27-year-old Elliot was closing a major acquisition deal when he received the call. His sister Rebecca, just 19 and away at college, waited alone at the hospital for hours before he arrived. The last conversation Elliot had with his father played like a haunting record in his mind. Son Thomas had said, his voice heavy with disappointment, Grayson Enterprises was built on trust and community. These aggressive takeovers, pushing out small businesses, this isn't what we stand for. Elliot had dismissed his father's concerns, too focused on quarterly profits to hear the wisdom in his words. Now those words would never come again. Robert Langford had been there through it all, his father's oldest friend and trusted business partner. "I'll help you through this," son Robert had promised at the funeral, his hand steady on Elliot's shoulder. Thomas would want the company to stay in the family. What Elliot didn't know then was that Robert had been quietly undermining Thomas Grayson for years, pushing for more aggressive business tactics while maintaining a facade of traditional values. In the weeks following the funeral, Rebecca had begged Elliot to stay with her, to grieve together. Instead, he buried himself in work, missing her college graduation, her first job celebration, and countless holidays. The Grayson family home, filled with memories of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, was sold to fund a corporate expansion. Their mother's cherished garden, where she had taught them both about patience and nurturing growth, was paved over for a parking structure. The investigation into the accident revealed troubling questions that were quickly buried under legal paperwork. The truck company's safety records disappeared. Witnesses changed their statements. Years later, a junior investigator would note the connection between the trucking company and a subsidiary of one of Grayson Enterprises' major competitors, but by then the case was long closed. Robert Langford's influence grew during this period, always present with convenient solutions to complex problems. He guided Elliot toward an increasingly ruthless business strategy, all while maintaining his position as a family friend and mentor. The kind, community-minded business practices that Thomas Grayson had championed were gradually replaced with aggressive expansion policies and hostile takeovers. Rebecca watched this transformation with growing alarm. She chose to study law, driven by unanswered questions about their parents' death and a desire to protect others from corporate misconduct. Her attempts to discuss her concerns with Elliot were met with cold dismissal. "The past is past," he would say, ending their increasingly rare conversations. The final break came 3 years ago, at what should have been their parents' 45th wedding anniversary. Rebecca had suggested visiting their graves together, perhaps re-establishing some family connection. Elliot cancelled at the last minute, citing an urgent merger meeting. The true nature of that meeting, a strategic discussion with Robert about acquiring and dismantling a family-owned business that had once been their father's closest competitor, remained his guilty secret. The weight of these unspoken truths and abandoned relationships settled into the fabric of Elliot's life, creating an emotional fortress that no one could penetrate. The ambitious young man who had once shared his father's vision of ethical business practices transformed into a corporate titan known for his merciless efficiency. The family photos disappeared from his office, replaced by financial awards and business magazine covers. The only reminder of his past life was a single photo kept in his bedside drawer, his father teaching him to ride a bike, both of them laughing in the summer sun, a moment of joy forever frozen in time. In the gleaming halls of Grayson Enterprises, Elliot Grayson's footsteps echoed with authority, but they echoed alone. His employees scurried out of his path, their faces masks of professional deference, hiding genuine fear. The morning's executive meeting exemplified his isolation. 12 board members sat around a mahogany table, none daring to challenge his decisions, none offering genuine input. It was exactly how he preferred it, or so he told himself. Catherine's words from their last argument 2 years ago still resonated. "You built this beautiful cage, Elliot, but you're the one trapped inside it." She had been the last person to attempt breaking through his walls. After 6 months of trying to create a real connection, she'd left a note on his pristinely made bed: "I can't compete with a company for someone's soul." His daily routine had become a symphony of solitude. Breakfast alone in his office, lunch meetings focused entirely on business, dinners often forgotten in favor of late-night work sessions. The cleaning staff knew to avoid his office until after 10 p.m., when he would finally head home to his empty penthouse. Even his weekend runs through Central Park, where exercises in isolation, his premium headphones blocking out any possibility of human interaction. The few relationships he maintained were purely transactional. His personal trainer, his tailor, his driver all paid handsomely to provide services without personal engagement. His executive assistant, Mark Davis, had perfected the art of anticipating needs without initiating conversation. The only person who still attempted genuine interaction was Daniel Hartman, his last remaining friend from college, whose weekly calls went consistently unanswered. At charity galas and business functions, Elliot moved through crowds like a ghost in an expensive suit. He made the required appearances, shook the necessary hands, but remained untouched by the genuine connections happening around him. Young executives sharing family photos, board members discussing weekend plans with colleagues, these moments of human warmth slid off him like rain on glass. His reputation in the business world was legendary: the Ice King of Wall Street, the solitary sultan, Manhattan's merciless. These nicknames, meant to be cutting, became badges of pride. Each successful acquisition, each defeated competitor, each shuttered family business added to his mythology while subtracting from his humanity. The walls of his office displayed his journey into isolation. The oldest photo showed a younger Elliot accepting his first business award, surrounded by smiling colleagues. In subsequent photos, the group grew smaller, the smiles more forced. The most recent showed him alone, accepting CEO of the Year, his expression a mask of corporate success hiding a hollow core. Even his charitable giving was devoid of personal connection. Donations were made through layers of corporate structure, impact measured in tax benefits rather than lives changed. When Susan Miller, a bright-eyed junior executive, proposed a community outreach program, his response was characteristic. "This company isn't a charity, Miss Miller. We're here to make money, not friends." At night, in his pristine penthouse, the city lights twinkled below like stars he couldn't reach. Sometimes in these quiet moments, memories would surface: Sunday dinners with his parents, teaching Rebecca to ride a bike, college adventures with Daniel. But these glimpses of a warmer past were quickly suppressed, filed away like unsuccessful business ventures. His phone would occasionally buzz with messages from Rebecca. "Mom's birthday today. Found Dad's old baseball glove. Remember?" When each notification was a pinprick to his carefully constructed armor, each ignored message another brick in his wall of solitude. The man who could close billion-dollar deals couldn't face a simple dinner with his sister. This was Elliot Grayson at 45, wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond question, and alone beyond rescue. Or so it seemed, until fate and a little girl named Lila conspired to shatter his carefully constructed world of isolation. The steady beep of medical equipment slowly filtered into Elliot's consciousness. The stark, white ceiling of Mount Sinai Hospital's VIP suite came into focus as his eyes adjusted to the harsh fluorescent lighting. His chest ached, not just from the heart attack, but from something deeper, a pain he couldn't quite identify. "Mr. Grayson," a gentle voice drew his attention. "I'm Dr. Sarah Bennett. You've had a significant cardiac event, but you're stable now." She paused, studying his face with professional concern. "You're very fortunate. If it wasn't for a little girl's quick action, things could have been much worse." Lila. The name floated back to him through the haze of medication. Small hands, worried eyes, a voice calling for help when everyone else walked past. The girl, he managed to say, his throat dry. "Is she?" "She's in the waiting room with her mother," Dr. Bennett replied, checking his vitals. "They've been here for hours, refused to leave until they knew you were okay. Quite remarkable, really." Before Elliot could process this information, a knock at the door revealed Hannah Thompson, her face showing signs of exhaustion, and Lila, still in her school uniform, clutching a handmade get well card. The child's face lit up when she saw him awake. "Mr. Elliot, you're okay." Hannah placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Lila, remember what we discussed about being quiet in hospitals?" But Elliot found himself warming to the child's unrestrained enthusiasm, so different from the careful, calculated interactions he was used to. "I made you a card," Lila announced, proudly holding up her artwork. Crayon-drawn hearts and stars framed the words "Get better soon" in wobbly letters. "Mummy says you had a heart attack. That's what happened to Mr. Jenkins next door, but he's better now too." As Lila chattered on, Elliot studied Hannah Thompson. She wore simple clothes, but carried herself with quiet dignity. Dark circles under her eyes suggested long hours of work or worry, possibly both. Yet there was a strength in her bearing that commanded respect. "Mr. Grayson," Hannah began, "we don't want to intrude. We just wanted to make sure you were all right." Her voice held a hint of uncertainty, as if she wasn't quite sure of her place in this private hospital room with its expensive equipment and exclusive amenities. "Please," Elliot found himself saying. "Call me Elliot." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Hannah. He couldn't remember the last time he'd invited someone to use his first name. "Did you know," Lila interjected, climbing onto the edge of his bed despite her mother's attempted intervention, "that when someone's hurt, you're supposed to help them?" "My daddy taught me that." He was really good at helping people. A shadow crossed Hannah's face at the mention of her late husband. Elliot caught it, his business-trained eye noting the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hand unconsciously moved to touch a simple gold wedding band. "Your daddy sounds very wise," Elliot replied, surprising himself again with the gentleness in his voice. "Would you tell me about him?" Hannah's eyes widened slightly at the request, but Lila needed no further encouragement. He was the bravest person ever. He saved people. That was his job. But then there was a big storm, and she trailed off, her cheerful demeanor dimming slightly. Lila, Hannah said softly. Perhaps Mr. Elliot needs to rest, but Elliot found himself strangely reluctant to end this unexpected interaction. "It's all right," he assured them, then turned to Lila. "Thank you for saving me on the bridge. You're very brave, just like your father." The child beamed at the comparison, but Hannah's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I should explain," she said quietly. 2 years ago, my husband David, he died on that same bridge where Lila found you. He was trying to save someone else." The revelation hit Elliot with unexpected force. Here was a man who had given his life for a stranger, while Elliot had spent years taking from others to build his empire. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. "Sometimes," Lila said, patting his hand with childish solemnity, "when people are sad or hurt, they just need someone to stop and help them. That's what Daddy always said." In that moment, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the presence of these two strangers who had shown him more genuine care than he'd experienced in years, Elliot Grayson felt something inside him begin to crack. The carefully constructed walls of his isolation developed their first significant fissure, though he wouldn't recognize it until much later. A week after his hospital release, Elliot found himself standing before a weathered brick building in Brooklyn, the address Hannah had reluctantly provided after his insistence on properly thanking them. The contrast between this neighborhood and his usual surroundings was stark. Here, laundry lines stretched between buildings, children played hopscotch on chalk-drawn squares, and the air filled with a mix of cooking aromas from various ethnic restaurants. The scent of fresh baked bread drew his attention to Sanchez Bakery across the street. Through the steamy windows, he observed an elderly couple working in perfect synchronization, Carlos kneading dough, while Maria arranged pastries in the display case. Their movements held a practiced intimacy that made him feel like an intruder just watching. Before he could ring the Thompsons' bell, Lila's voice called out Mr. Elliot. She ran toward him from the bakery, a paper bag clutched in her small hands. "We saw you from the window. Mrs. Sanchez gave me extra cookies because I helped sweep this morning." Her face beamed with pride at her contribution. Hannah appeared behind her, wearing a nurse's scrubs and looking tired but welcoming. "We were just heading home. Would you like to come up?" The invitation seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. The Thompson apartment was small but immaculately kept. Children's artwork decorated the walls, and well-worn furniture spoke of a life lived rather than displayed. It was everything his penthouse wasn't: modest, warm, alive. "I wanted to thank you properly," Elliot began, reaching for his checkbook. But Lila interrupted, tugging at his sleeve. "Want to see my neighborhood?" she asked excitedly. "There's the library, where Mrs. Harris lets me read any book one want, and the community center where Coach Peterson teaches basketball, and the best ice cream shop ever." Before he could respond, she was pulling him toward the door, Hannah following with an apologetic smile. "She tends to take charge," she explained softly. The next 2 hours transformed Elliot's understanding of community. Lila introduced him to everyone they passed: Mr. Chen at the grocery store, counting out food stamps for an elderly customer, Sarah Miller, teaching free art classes in the park, James Rodriguez, fixing his father's auto repair shop sign. At the community center, they found Coach Peterson working with a group of teenagers. These kids could be champions, the coach confided to Elliot, if we could afford proper equipment. But we make do. The library revealed Mrs. Harris helping students with homework. Not all parents can afford tutors, she explained, so we try to fill the gap. Her eyes held the same passionate commitment he'd seen in every person they'd met. The ice cream shop owner, Mr. Giovanni, greeted Lila by name and added an extra scoop for her new friend. As they sat outside enjoying their treats, Elliot observed the street life, neighbors helping neighbors, children playing under the watchful eyes of the entire community, small businesses supporting each other despite their own struggles. Mr. Martinez's restaurant gives free meals to kids who can't afford lunch, Lila explained, ice cream dripping down her cone. And when Mrs. Chen was sick, everyone took turns helping at her store. Hannah watched her daughter's enthusiastic tour guiding with quiet pride. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," she said softly. "But there's real wealth here, just not the kind you can put in a bank." The statement struck Elliot deeply. He thought of his empty penthouse, his silent meals, his relationships measured in market value. Here, surrounded by peeling paint and worn sidewalks, he witnessed a richness he'd forgotten existed. Their tour ended back at Sanchez Bakery, where Maria insisted they take home fresh bread. "No charge for friends," she declared firmly, despite Elliot's attempt to pay. The word friends echoed in his mind. When was the last time someone had used that term without wanting something from him? As they prepared to part ways, Lila made an unexpected request. "Could you come visit again?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. "There's so much more to show you." Hannah began to apologize for her daughter's forwardness, but Elliot surprised himself by saying, "I'd like that the words were genuine, something rare in his carefully scripted life." Walking back to his waiting car, Elliot passed Mr. Chen closing his grocery store, watched Mrs. Miller gathering her art supplies from the park, and nodded to Coach Peterson locking up the community center. Each person called out a goodbye to him, not as a CEO or a millionaire, but simply as Lila's friend. For the first time in years, he felt a stirring of something long forgotten, a sense of connection, of belonging to something larger than profit margins and market shares. The neighborhood's apparent poverty masked a wealth his billions couldn't buy: genuine human connections, mutual support, shared joy and sorrow. In his pocket, the check he'd intended to give Hannah remained unwritten. Something told him she would have refused it anyway, and somehow that made him respect her even more. Back in his penthouse that evening, Elliot found himself unable to focus on work. The quarterly reports on his desk, usually absorbing enough to keep him working until midnight, seemed suddenly hollow. Instead, his mind kept returning to the scenes he'd witnessed in Brooklyn: the warmth of the Sanchez Bakery, the dedication of Coach Peterson, the quiet dignity of Hannah Thompson. Standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows, he caught his reflection in the glass: perfectly tailored suit, precisely knotted tie, every hair in place. Behind him, the penthouse stretched out in its pristine emptiness. The contrast with the living, breathing community he'd visited struck him with unexpected force. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert Langford: urgent meeting tomorrow, Morton's automotive acquisition. Time to close the deal. Elliot knew what that meant. Morton's was a family-owned chain of repair shops, the kind that served communities like the one he'd just visited. The acquisition would mean consolidation, job losses, another neighborhood's heart ripped out in the name of profit. He opened his laptop to review the acquisition details, but instead found himself searching for David Thompson. The news articles from 2 years ago told the story: local hero dies saving teen on Brooklyn Bridge. The photo showed a man with Lila's eyes and warm smile, described by neighbors as someone who always put others first. The teenager he saved had been attempting suicide after his family lost their business to a corporate takeover. The irony wasn't lost on Elliot. How many David Thompsons had his business decisions affected? How many communities had he disrupted with his mergers and acquisitions? His father's words echoed in his memory: Grayson Enterprises was built on trust and community. A text from Hannah appeared. Lila wanted to say goodnight. She hopes you enjoyed the tour. Attached was a photo of Lila holding up another drawing, this one showing stick figures of herself, her mother, and him walking through her neighborhood. Elliot found himself opening his rarely used personal email, clicking on years of ignored messages from Rebecca, photos of family events he'd missed, invitations he'd declined, attempts at connection he'd dismissed. One recent message caught his eye, found Dad's old business journal. Remember how he knew every employee's name? How he visited every store personally? Miss those days. Miss you. The internal conflict intensified as he prepared for bed. His usual efficiency felt mechanical now, tainted by awareness. The Egyptian cotton sheets seemed unnecessarily luxurious, the silence of his bedroom oppressive rather than peaceful. He thought of Hannah, working long hours as a nurse while raising Lila alone, yet still finding time to help neighbors and show kindness to strangers. Sleep proved elusive. At 3 a.m. he found himself in his home office, pulling up old company records. In the early days, under his father's leadership, Grayson Enterprises had been different. Employee welfare programs, community investment initiatives, profit-sharing schemes all gradually dismantled during Elliot's tenure in favor of aggressive expansion. His father's old business motto, carved into the cornerstone of their first store, haunted him. Success is measured by lives improved, not just profits gained. When had he lost sight of that principle? When had the pursuit of wealth become more important than the impact on real people? Dawn found him still awake, watching the city come to life below. Street vendors set up their carts, early commuters hurried to subway stations, delivery trucks made their rounds. He'd always viewed this morning dance from above, separate and superior. Now he wondered about the stories behind each person, the communities they belonged to, the lives his decisions affected. His phone buzzed again, Robert, reminding him about the Morton's acquisition meeting. The familiar surge of business adrenaline felt different now, tainted by new awareness. He thought of Mr. Rodriguez at the auto repair shop, teaching neighborhood kids basic mechanics after school. How many similar stories would the Morton's acquisition end? Getting dressed for work, Elliot caught himself straightening his tie with practiced precision and stopped mid-motion. When had he become this automaton, this creature of pure business instinct without human connection? The face in the mirror looked suddenly foreign. Successful, certainly, but at what cost? The final blow to his composure came in the elevator. The morning news played on the small screen. Local community center faces closure. The camera panned across a familiar basketball court where he'd watched Coach Peterson working with teenagers just yesterday. The reporter mentioned budget cuts and rising rents, the kind of market pressures his own business practices often created. As his driver held open the car door, Elliot realized he stood at a crossroads. Continue as before, adding to his wealth while diminishing the world's warmth, or what? The alternative path remained unclear, but for the first time in years he felt the stirring of something like conscience. The sleek car glided toward Grayson Enterprises, where Robert and the board awaited his decision on Morton's automotive. For the first time in his career, Elliot Grayson was uncertain about a business decision, and even more surprisingly, he wasn't sure that was a bad thing. Robert Langford sat in his dimly lit office, meticulously altering financial reports with practiced precision. The soft glow of his computer screen illuminated his satisfied smirk as he shifted decimal points and adjusted figures, creating a narrative of mounting losses under Elliot's leadership. 20 years of waiting, of playing the loyal friend and mentor, were about to pay off. Mr. Langford, his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. The private investigator is here. Leonard Brooks entered, a weathered man carrying a thick manila envelope. You'll find these interesting, he said, spreading photographs across Robert's mahogany desk. The images told a story. Elliot visiting the Brooklyn neighborhood, sitting in a modest bakery, walking with Hannah and Lila Thompson. Excellent, Robert murmured, selecting a particularly damaging photo of Elliot dressed casually, looking decidedly CEO-like while pushing Lila on a park swing. Our board members will be very concerned about his emotional stability. The investigation into Elliot's activities had been thorough. Brooks had documented every visit to the Thompson apartment, every interaction with local business owners, every moment that showed Elliot straying from his corporate persona. There's more, Brooks added, producing another set of photos. He's been meeting with his sister Rebecca. She's a corporate lawyer now, specializing in ethics and accountability. Robert's jaw tightened. Rebecca had always been too perceptive, too questioning. Like her father. Keep watching them, he ordered. I want to know every move, every conversation, every potential threat to our plan. Alone again, Robert opened his wall safe and removed a worn leather folder. Inside lay documents from 15 years ago, the real accident report from the night Thomas and Margaret Grayson died, complete with evidence of tampered brake lines and a payoff to the truck driver. Thomas had been close to discovering Robert's embezzlement scheme. Too close. Now Robert carefully constructed his masterpiece of deception. He doctored board meeting minutes, created false email trails, and fabricated evidence of Elliot's supposed mismanagement. The story was perfect: a once brilliant CEO suffering an emotional breakdown, making irrational decisions, betraying shareholder interests. Susan Miller, the bright-eyed junior executive, proved an unwitting ally. Her proposal for community outreach programs, rejected by Elliot months ago, became evidence of his erratic behavior when he suddenly showed interest in similar initiatives. Robert took pleasure in watching her confusion as he subtly manipulated her perspective. Notice how distracted he's been lately, Robert mentioned casually to board member Thomas Reed, missing crucial meetings, spending time in Brooklyn of all places. It's concerning he planted similar seeds of doubt throughout the company, watching them grow into full-blown concerns. The media strategy was equally calculated. Strategic leaks to financial journalists suggested investigations into Grayson Enterprises' stability. Rumors of board displeasure circulated in business circles. Robert's network of influencers, carefully cultivated over decades, began questioning Elliot's leadership in public forums. Our stock could suffer if word gets out about his emotional state, Robert whispered to one executive. Perhaps it's time for new leadership, he suggested to another. Each conversation was a brush stroke in his portrait of a CEO losing control. The final piece fell into place when Robert discovered Hannah Thompson's medical records. Her lupus treatments, the mounting bills, the threat of eviction, all leveraged to be used at the perfect moment. If Elliot couldn't be driven out by professional disgrace, perhaps emotional manipulation would do the trick. Standing at his office window, Robert watched the city lights flicker below. Soon, very soon, Grayson Enterprises would be his. The company Thomas Grayson built through trust and community would become a machine of pure profit. The thought brought a smile to his face as he remembered Thomas's last words to him: "Take care of my children, old friend." "Oh, I'll take care of them," Thomas Robert murmured to his reflection. "Just not quite the way you meant." His phone buzzed another update from Brooks. Elliot was spending an unusual amount of time at the Sanchez Bakery, apparently using it as an informal office. Perfect. More evidence of his declining judgment and professional standards. Robert began drafting the email that would set everything in motion. The board would receive detailed reports of their CEO's concerning behavior and questionable decisions. The shareholders would learn of mysterious financial discrepancies. And Elliot, caught in a web of manufactured evidence and manipulated relationships, would never see the betrayal coming until it was too late. As he clicked send, Robert allowed himself a moment of triumph. Everything was falling into place, and Elliot Grayson, too preoccupied with his newfound conscience, had no idea what was coming. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai Hospital cast harsh shadows as Elliot burst through the emergency room doors. Lila sat alone in the waiting room, her small frame curled into a large chair, still wearing her school uniform. But when she saw him, her face crumpled with relief and fear. "Mr. Elliot," she cried, running to him. Mommy fell down at work. She wouldn't wake up. Her voice trembled as she clutched his hand. "The other nurses called the ambulance. They wouldn't let me go with her." Elliot lifted her into his arms, feeling her small body shake with suppressed sobs. His usual corporate armor cracked completely at the sight of her distress. "Your mom is strong," Lila, he assured her, though his own heart raced with concern. "The doctors will take good care of her." Dr. Sarah Bennett, who had treated Elliot during his heart attack, approached them with a grave expression. "Mr. Grayson," she began, then paused, looking at Lila. Understanding the need for discretion, Elliot asked Rebecca, who had arrived moments after him, to take Lila to the cafeteria for hot chocolate. Once they were alone, Dr. Bennett explained Hannah's condition. Her lupus has progressed significantly. She's been skipping her own medications to pay for basic necessities. The doctor's voice held controlled anger. The stress of working double shifts, caring for Lila alone, and managing her condition. Her body simply couldn't take it anymore. Elliot's mind raced through recent memories: Hannah's increasing pallor, the slight tremor in her hands he'd noticed but hadn't questioned, the extra shifts she'd mentioned taking on. How had he, with all his wealth and resources, not seen her struggling? "She needs immediate treatment," Dr. Bennett continued. "But her insurance is limited, and the medications are expensive." Without proper care, she left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung heavy in the air. Through the ICU window, Elliot watched Hannah's unconscious form, surrounded by beeping monitors and IV lines. She looked small and vulnerable, so different from the strong, dignified woman who had refused his help weeks before. A nurse adjusted her oxygen mask, checking vitals with practiced efficiency. Lila returned with Rebecca, clutching a paper cup of hot chocolate. "Can I see Mummy?" she asked in a small voice. The nurse helped her put on a protective gown, mask, and gloves before leading her to Hannah's bedside. Watching through the window, Elliot saw Lila carefully place her latest drawing on her mother's bedside table, a picture of their little family, including him, standing in front of the Sanchez bakery. "She's been adding you to all her family drawings lately," Rebecca observed quietly. "When I was getting her hot chocolate, she told me she wishes you were her dad." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow. He'd gone from isolated CEO to being drawn into a child's family portraits, and somehow it felt more significant than any business achievement. The night stretched on. Rebecca took Lila home to sleep, promising to bring her back first thing in the morning. Elliot remained, using his influence to ensure Hannah received the best care available. He sat in her room, watching her chest rise and fall with each assisted breath, thinking about the complex web of circumstances that had brought them to this point. Around midnight, Hannah stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, immediately filling with panic when she couldn't locate Lila. "She's safe," Elliot assured her quickly, taking her hand. "Rebecca took her home to rest. She'll be back in the morning." Hannah tried to speak, but her voice was weak. The rent she managed. "Bills due." "Don't worry about any of that," Elliot said firmly. "Focus on getting better. Lila needs you." He paused, surprising himself with the depth of emotion in his voice. "I need you to get better too." Tears slipped from Hannah's eyes as she squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want anyone to know how bad things were. Didn't want to be a burden." The woman who had shown him the meaning of community, who had helped him rediscover his humanity, had been silently struggling all along. The irony struck him deeply. He had been learning about connection and compassion from someone who desperately needed both, but was too proud to ask. As Hannah drifted back to sleep, Elliot made silent promises. He would ensure she received the best medical care available. He would make sure Lila was cared for during her recovery. He would protect this small family that had somehow become essential to his world. His phone buzzed with messages from Robert about urgent business matters, but for the first time in his career, Elliot ignored them completely. Instead, he sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, holding Hannah's hand, watching over her sleep, and realizing that some things were far more important than corporate empires. Dawn found him still there, changed irrevocably by the night's events, understanding finally that wealth meant nothing without the people you cared about to share it with? The bell above the Sanchez bakery door chimed as Elliot entered, the familiar aroma of fresh bread enveloping him. Maria and Carlos looked up from their work, their expressions concerned. Word of Hannah's hospitalization had spread quickly through the tight-knit neighborhood. "How is she?" Maria asked, already packing a bag with Hannah's favorite pastries. Behind her, Carlos wiped flour from his hands, his usually cheerful face serious. The small bakery had become an unofficial community center in the days since Hannah's collapse. "Stable but weak," Elliot replied, settling into what had become his regular seat near the window. The medical bills. He paused, noticing the worried glances exchanged between the couple. "They're taken care of, but there's more we need to discuss." Over the next hour, local business owners filtered in. Coach Peterson arrived from the community center, followed by Mrs. Harris from the library. Mr. Chen closed his grocery store early to attend. The small space filled with people who had become surprisingly important to Elliot over the past weeks. "Our neighborhood is dying," Mr. Chen stated bluntly once everyone had gathered. "Rents keep rising, big corporations buying everything." Now Hannah, he shook his head, the weight of collective struggles evident in his gesture. Elliot stood, feeling the eyes of the community on him. For once, his expensive suit felt out of place. "I've been reviewing the situation," he began. "The property management company that's raising your rents, Sterling Properties, they're actually a subsidiary of a larger corporation." Mrs. Harris leaned forward. "Grayson Enterprises?" she asked quietly, connecting the dots. The room fell silent as everyone processed this revelation. "Yes," Elliot admitted, "but that's going to change. I'm proposing we form a small business coalition. Together, we can negotiate better terms, share resources, create a support network." His voice grew stronger as he outlined his vision. "We start here in this neighborhood, but it could spread throughout Brooklyn." Coach Peterson stood up. "With all due respect, Mr. Grayson, we've seen corporate promises before. They usually end with more empty storefronts." "Fair point," Elliot acknowledged. "That's why I'm not asking you to trust Grayson Enterprises. I'm asking you to trust me not as a CEO, but as someone who's learned more about true value from this community in a few weeks than I learned in 20 years of business." Maria Sanchez stepped forward, her voice firm. "I trust him. I've watched him with Lila, seen how he sits with Hannah. He's not the same man who first walked into my bakery." One by one, the business owners shared their thoughts. Mr. Chen spoke about the time Elliot helped his daughter with her college applications. Mrs. Harris recalled how he'd spent hours helping reorganize the library's funding reports. Coach Peterson mentioned the new basketball equipment that had mysteriously appeared at the community center. "We need to act fast," Elliot continued, spreading out documents on a flour-dusted table. "First, we establish the coalition legally. Then we negotiate as a unified front. No more divide-and-conquer tactics from property managers." The meeting stretched into the evening. Plans were made, committees formed, responsibilities divided. The energy in the room transformed from despair to determination. Even Carlos's day-old pastries tasted like hope. As the meeting concluded, Sarah Miller, who had been quietly observing, approached Elliot. "The board won't like this," she warned. "Helping small businesses organize against corporate interests? Robert Langford will see it as a betrayal." "Let him," Elliot replied, watching the community members leave. Their spirits lifted for the first time in months. Some things are worth more than board approval. Later that night, visiting Hannah in the hospital, Elliot shared the day's developments. Though weak, her eyes sparkled with interest. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "Taking on your own company?" "Not taking on," he corrected, adjusting her blanket with unexpected tenderness. "Transforming. Making it what it should have been all along, what my father intended it to be." Lila, curled up in a chair nearby, looked up from her drawing. "Mr. Elliot is going to help everybody," she announced confidently. "Just like Daddy used to." The comparison touched something deep in Elliot's heart. David Thompson had died saving one life. Perhaps his legacy could live on in saving an entire community. His phone buzzed Robert Langford, demanding an explanation for his absence from board meetings. Elliot silenced it without reading the message. In the hospital room's quiet, watching Hannah drift off to sleep, while Lila drew another family picture, he knew he'd chosen the right path. Outside, the Brooklyn streets hummed with renewed energy. The Small Business Coalition's first meeting had planted seeds of hope. In shops and stores throughout the neighborhood, people spoke in whispers about the corporate CEO who was choosing community over profit. The transformation was beginning, not just of a neighborhood, but of a man's soul. And somewhere, Elliot felt certain his father was smiling. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Grayson Enterprises boardroom as Robert Langford presented his carefully crafted evidence. As you can see, he announced to the assembled board members, gesturing to the financial projections displayed on the screen, "Under Elliot's recent leadership, our stock value has dropped significantly." Thomas Reed, the longest-serving board member, adjusted his glasses with concern. The charts and graphs painted a damning picture: losses mounting, investor confidence falling, questionable decisions piling up. What they couldn't see were the careful manipulations behind each figure, the subtle alterations that transformed success into failure. Furthermore, Robert continued, clicking to the next slide, Mr. Grayson's recent behavior has become increasingly erratic. He's been spotted in Brooklyn, consorting with small business owners, missing crucial meetings. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The stress of his recent health scare seems to have affected his judgment. Susan Miller sat quietly in the corner, her laptop open to the real financial records she'd been secretly gathering. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, documenting every discrepancy in Robert's presentation. The risk was enormous: her career, her daughter's college fund, everything she'd worked for hung in the balance. Meanwhile, in the modest office above Sanchez Bakery, Elliot and Rebecca pored over documents spread across a flour-dusted table. "Look at these transaction dates," Rebecca pointed out, her legal training evident in her methodical approach. "They don't match the official records. Someone's been manipulating the books for years." Mark Davis entered, carrying more files. "You need to see this," he said, laying out a series of photographs. "These were taken the night of your parents' accident. They were buried in the company archives." The images showed the damaged truck, skid marks that didn't match the official report, and something more disturbing: Robert Langford at the scene hours before he officially arrived. Elliot's hands clenched into fists as the pieces began falling into place. "He was there," he whispered. "He knew about the brake tampering." All these years, Rebecca placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. The investigation expanded rapidly. Sarah Miller, despite Robert's threats, provided crucial evidence about altered board meeting minutes. Longtime employees came forward with stories of Robert's subtle manipulations. Even the security guard who had worked the night shift 15 years ago remembered strange details about Robert's movements around the time of the accident. Back at Grayson Enterprises, Robert's confidence grew with each passing day. He moved through the offices like a king approaching his coronation, unaware that his carefully constructed web of lies was beginning to unravel. Once Elliot's gone, he assured his closest allies, "We'll restructure the company. No more community outreach, no more small business considerations, pure profit." The battle lines were drawn in emails, boardroom presentations, and quiet conversations in corner offices. Robert's supporters, many compromised by their own involvement in his schemes, rallied behind him. But others, touched by Elliot's recent changes or harboring long-held doubts about Robert, began to question the official narrative. Late one night, as Elliot reviewed another stack of documents, Hannah entered the bakery office. Despite her ongoing recovery, her eyes were sharp with purpose. "I found something," she said, placing a worn leather journal on the table. It was David's. He used to work as a safety inspector for trucking companies. The night of your parents' accident, he was called to examine the truck. He noted brake tampering, but the report was buried. The revelation hit Elliot like a physical blow. David Thompson had known the truth, had perhaps been silenced by the same forces that later contributed to his death. The connection between their families, already strong through Lila's love, deepened with this shared history of loss and betrayal. Susan Miller's moment of truth came during a crucial board meeting. As Robert presented his final evidence against Elliot, she stood up, her voice shaking but determined. "I have proof," she announced, connecting her laptop to the display screen. Proof of systematic fraud, document alteration, and she paused, gathering courage, evidence linking Mr. Langford to the death of Thomas and Margaret Grayson. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Robert's face contorted with rage as he lunged for the laptop, but security personnel, quietly positioned by Mark Davis, intervened. Thomas Reed, his face ashen, called for an immediate audit of all company records. The next few days passed in a blur of revelations. Forensic accountants discovered the full scope of Robert's deceptions. Law enforcement, presented with evidence of his involvement in the Grayson accident, launched a criminal investigation. Long-buried secrets emerged into the harsh light of justice. Through it all, Elliot found strength in unexpected places, in Lila's unwavering faith, in Hannah's quiet support, in the solidarity of the Brooklyn community he'd grown to love. The small business owners who had once feared Grayson Enterprises now rallied behind its true heir, sharing their own stories of Robert's predatory practices. Rebecca, working tirelessly beside her brother, finally uncovered the last piece of the puzzle documentation of Robert's early attempts to push their father out, dating back to when Elliot was still in college. The betrayal had been planned for decades, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the evidence mounted, Robert's allies began to desert him. Board members, faced with irrefutable proof of his crimes, rushed to distance themselves. The carefully constructed facade of the loyal friend and mentor crumbled, revealing the calculating manipulator beneath. The final confrontation came not in a boardroom or courtroom, but in the quiet of Elliot's old office. Robert, his empire crumbling, faced his former protege with desperate anger. "You're weak, just like your father," he spat. "All this concern for community, for small businesses, it's pathetic. I made you what you are." Elliot, standing by the window where he'd once surveyed his kingdom in isolation, replied quietly, "No, Robert. You tried to make me like you alone, bitter, seeing only profit where there should be people. But thanks to a little girl on a bridge, I remembered who I really am, who my father raised me to be." The corporate battle had been won, but the true victory lay not in defeated enemies or reclaimed power. It lay in the transformation of Grayson Enterprises itself, from a mere profit machine back to the community-oriented company Thomas Grayson had envisioned. And more importantly, in the transformation of Elliot Grayson from isolated tycoon to a man reconnected with his humanity. As Robert was led away by security, Elliot's phone buzzed with a message from Hannah. "Lila wants to know if you're still coming for dinner tonight. She says even corporate battles shouldn't interfere with family time." Looking at the message, Elliot smiled, understanding finally what his father had meant about true success being measured in lives improved, not just profits gained. In the quiet evening hours at Hannah's apartment, Elliot found himself sitting on the worn but comfortable couch, helping Lila with her homework. The scene was so far removed from his former life that sometimes it felt like a dream. Hannah, steadily recovering her strength, watched them from the kitchen where she was preparing a simple dinner. "Mr. Elliot," Lila asked, looking up from her math problems, "why do you look sad when you see my daddy's picture?" The question caught him off guard. On the wall hung a photograph of David Thompson in his rescue worker's uniform, his smile warm and genuine, everything Elliot had forgotten how to be. Because he answered carefully, "Your daddy understood something that took me a very long time to learn. He knew that helping others makes your own life richer." Hannah paused in her cooking, listening quietly. The transformation in Elliot had been gradual but profound. Gone were the perfectly pressed suits, replaced more often by casual clothes that felt increasingly natural. His phone, once constantly buzzing with business demands, now held photos of Lila's art projects and messages from community members. One Saturday morning, he arrived at the Sanchez bakery to find Rebecca already there, deep in conversation with Maria about expanding the business. His sister looked up, smiling at his arrival, a simple gesture that would have been impossible months ago. Their relationship had healed slowly, built on shared purpose and rediscovered memories. "Remember when Dad used to take us to that little bakery in Queens?" Rebecca asked as they walked together later. "He knew every employee's name, asked about their family." She paused, touching his arm. "You're becoming more like him every day, you know." The comment moved him deeply. He thought of the recent board meeting where he'd announced new company policies, profit sharing for employees, community investment initiatives, small business support programs. His father would have approved, he knew. Hannah's recovery brought its own kind of growth. Elliot found himself spending evenings at their apartment, first as a concerned friend, then as something more. They would talk after Lila went to bed, sharing stories of their past lives. Hannah spoke of David with love and acceptance, helping Elliot understand that new beginnings didn't require forgetting. "He would have liked you," she said one night, as they sat on her small balcony watching the city lights. David believed everyone deserved a second chance at happiness. Her hand found his in the darkness, a touch that spoke of possibility and healing. Lila, with a child's intuition, sensed the changes in their relationship. Her family drawings began to include Elliot more prominently, no longer just a figure on the periphery, but central to their small unit. One morning she slipped and called him Dad, then froze, uncertain of his reaction. Elliot knelt down to her level, his heart full. "I would be honored," he said softly, "if you wanted to call me that." Hannah, watching from the doorway, wiped away tears as Lila threw her arms around his neck. The neighborhood noticed the changes too. Mr. Chen no longer tensed when Elliot entered his store. Coach Peterson invited him to help coach youth basketball. Mrs. Harris asked his advice about library funding. He wasn't just the rich outsider anymore, he had become part of the community's fabric. His personal transformation reflected in his business dealings. During a crucial negotiation with investors, he found himself thinking not just about profit margins, but about the families who would be affected. When a competitor attempted a hostile takeover of a local business chain, Elliot stepped in to protect the workers' interests. One evening, alone in his penthouse, Elliot realized he hadn't felt lonely in weeks. The space that had once seemed like a symbol of success now felt empty and cold. Looking around at the pristine, unlived-in rooms, he made a decision. The next day, he began transforming the penthouse. Lila's artwork replaced expensive prints. Family photos, new ones with Hannah and Lila, Rebecca, and the community members who had become friends filled the previously empty shelves. The formal dining room, never used, became a play area for when Lila visited. His father's old business journal found a permanent place on his bedside table. Each night he would read a few pages, finding wisdom in the simple entries about community, responsibility, and the true meaning of success. Sometimes Hannah would read with him, offering insights from her own experiences of loss and renewal. The most significant change came during a quiet Sunday dinner at Hannah's apartment. Lila was showing off her latest art project, a detailed drawing of their whole family, which now included Rebecca, the Sanchezes, and various community members. "You know," Hannah said, after Lila had gone to bed, "this apartment's getting a bit small for all the love it's trying to hold." The implication hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Elliot took her hand, understanding the moment's weight. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about selling the penthouse, finding a place here in the neighborhood, somewhere we could all be together." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "David once told me that home isn't about the walls around you," she said softly. "It's about the hearts inside them." Later that night, walking back through the Brooklyn streets he'd come to love, Elliot reflected on his journey. The man who had collapsed on the bridge months ago, isolated, cold, focused only on wealth, seemed like a stranger now. In his place was someone who understood that true richness came not from what you owned, but from who you loved and how you helped others. His phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca, found Mum's old gardening journal. Think Lila might like to help start a community garden. The idea brought a smile to his face as he thought of his mother's love for growing things, nurturing them to bloom. In a way, that's what this community had done for him, planted seeds of change and helped them grow into something beautiful. The transformation wasn't complete. There would always be more to learn, more ways to grow, more love to give and receive. But for the first time since his parents' death, Elliot Grayson felt truly alive, truly himself. And he understood finally that this was his father's real legacy, not the company, but the capacity to care, to connect, to create positive change in the world. The dawn light had barely touched the Brooklyn skyline when smoke began billowing from the Sanchez Bakery's kitchen. Maria's anguished cry brought neighbors running from all directions. Carlos stood in the street, soot-stained and devastated, watching as firefighters battled the blaze that threatened to destroy their life's work. It wasn't an accident, Fire Inspector Williams stated grimly, pointing out signs of tampering with the electrical system. The timing was suspicious, just days after the Small Business Coalition had successfully negotiated reduced rents for its members. The message was clear: resistance had consequences. Elliot arrived to find the community already mobilizing. Mr. Chen had opened his grocery store as a temporary gathering space. Coach Peterson organized volunteers to clean up debris. Mrs. Harris started a collection for repairs. The sight of their unified response made his throat tight with emotion. But we can't let them win, Maria declared, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. This bakery isn't just our business, it's the heart of our neighborhood. Carlos wrapped an arm around his wife, nodding in agreement. The challenges mounted quickly. Other coalition members reported mysterious inspections, finding code violations that hadn't existed the week before. Mr. Rodriguez's auto repair shop lost its insurance coverage without explanation. The library's grant funding was suddenly under review. At an emergency coalition meeting in the community center, tension filled the air. Maybe we should back down, Mr. Chen suggested reluctantly. They're too powerful. Look what happened to the bakery. Elliot stood, addressing the worried faces before him. This is exactly how they win, he said firmly. They count on fear dividing us, but together we're stronger than their intimidation tactics. Hannah, still recovering but determined to attend, spoke up from her seat. When David died, she said quietly, this community carried us through. They brought food, watched Lila, covered my shifts at the hospital. That's what community means, standing together when things are hardest. The coalition didn't just survive, it grew stronger. When inspectors arrived at Mr. Chen's grocery store, they found 20 community members inside, casually shopping while documenting every interaction on their phones. The library's grant review mysteriously resolved after Rebecca filed legal inquiries into the process. The Sanchez Bakery became a symbol of resistance. Community members took shifts helping with repairs. Local contractors offered services at cost. Children, led by Lila, organized a bake sale to raise funds. Even Elliot's corporate connections proved useful, as legitimate suppliers offered better terms to support the rebuilding. But the opposition adapted. Anonymous letters appeared, suggesting that Elliot's interest in the neighborhood was just another corporate takeover strategy. Some residents, remembering past betrayals by big business, began to doubt his intentions. The whispers reached Hannah. They're saying you'll leave once you get what you want, she admitted one evening, voicing the fear she'd been holding back, that this is all some elaborate business strategy. Elliot took her hand, remembering the man he'd been before, the one who might have done exactly that. I'm not that person anymore, he said softly. This community, you Lila, you've shown me what really matters. I'm home. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a community dinner in the partially repaired bakery, Robert's hired thugs attempted to intimidate coalition members. They hadn't counted on Mrs. Peterson's grandson live-streaming the entire incident or on the community's unified response. Instead of scattering in fear, the residents locked arms, forming a human chain around the bakery. Elderly Mr. Ramirez started singing "We Shall Overcome," his wavering voice joined by others, until the street filled with song. The thugs retreated, confronted by something they couldn't: intimidate the power of united community. The video went viral. News outlets picked up the story of small businesses fighting corporate bullying. Other neighborhoods reached out, wanting to form their own coalitions. What started as a local struggle became a movement. Through it all, the community's spirit remained unbroken. When Mr. Rodriguez's shop lost power mysteriously, neighbors ran extension cords from their homes. When the library's computers were vandalized, a tech company owned by a former resident donated new ones. The Sanchez Bakery reopened stronger than ever, its walls now decorated with photos of the community members who helped rebuild it. The first batch of bread was shared among those who had stood together through the crisis, a communion of sorts that celebrated their collective strength. Late one evening, as Elliot helped Carlos close up the bakery, the older man shared his wisdom. "You know what they don't understand," he said, gesturing to the street outside. "They think breaking things will break our spirit, but each attack makes us stronger, closer." Looking out at the neighborhood he'd grown to love, Elliot understood. The pristine corporate world he'd once inhabited seemed sterile compared to this vibrant community where people fought for each other, supported each other, celebrated and mourned together. A child's drawing hung prominently near the bakery's counter, Lila's artwork showing the entire neighborhood holding hands around their beloved shops. Below it she'd written in careful letters, "My family." Looking at it, Elliot realized that all the wealth he'd accumulated in his previous life couldn't match the richness of belonging to this community. The challenges weren't over. Corporate interests would continue their pressure, find new ways to threaten and divide. But something fundamental had changed. The neighborhood had rediscovered its collective strength, and Elliot had found his true purpose. That night, walking home with Hannah and Lila, passing neighbors who called out greetings by name, Elliot felt a deep sense of peace. The community's struggles had revealed its character, just as his own challenges had revealed his. Together they would face whatever came next, stronger for having faced these trials united. The stars emerged above Brooklyn's rooftops, witnessing a neighborhood changed not by defeat, but by the discovery of its own power. In the warmth of these bonds, forged stronger by adversity, Elliot finally understood what his father had meant about true success. It wasn't measured in dollars, but in the strength of the connections between people who chose to stand together no matter what came their way. The morning air filled with screams as flames engulfed the newly renovated Sanchez Bakery. This time the fire was more devastating than the first, spreading rapidly through the historic building. Maria collapsed in Carlos's arms as their life's work burned before their eyes. But this was just the beginning of a day that would test the community's resilience to its breaking point. Across town, Hannah Thompson's condition suddenly deteriorated during her morning shift at the hospital. The stress of recent events had triggered a severe lupus flare. As colleagues rushed her to emergency care, her phone buzzed repeatedly with unanswered calls from Lila's school. Lila never arrived for her afternoon classes. The school's security footage showed her being led away by a well-dressed woman claiming to be her aunt. The kidnapper's face was hidden from cameras, but her expensive suit and corporate demeanor suggested a connection to Robert's world. Elliot received all three pieces of news within minutes of each other. Standing in his office at Grayson Enterprises, he watched his world threatening to implode. A fourth message arrived: Robert Langford requesting an immediate meeting to discuss terms. The police established a command center at the community center, but their questions seemed designed to cast doubt rather than find answers. MS. Thompson's medical bills. Mr. Grayson's sudden interest in her daughter. The insurance policy on the bakery. It all seems rather convenient. One detective suggested. Rebecca arrived at the hospital to find Hannah barely conscious, her body fighting against itself. The doctors spoke in urgent whispers about organ failure and the need for experimental treatments that her insurance wouldn't cover. Through her delirium, Hannah kept asking for Lila. The community mobilized with devastating efficiency. Coach Peterson organized search parties. Mrs. Harris coordinated with her network of librarians across the city. Mr. Chen's grocery store became an impromptu communications hub, its walls covered with maps and possible sightings. Elliot received a text message, a photo of Lila, tearful but unharmed, holding today's newspaper. The message was simple: your choice, the girl or the company. A second message provided an account number for transferring controlling shares of Grayson Enterprises. The bakery fire spread to adjacent buildings, threatening to destroy the entire block. As firefighters battled the blaze, evidence emerged that the building's sprinkler system had been professionally disabled. The arsonist had known exactly what they were doing. In his corner office, Robert Langford watched the chaos unfold with clinical detachment. Each crisis had been meticulously planned, timed to create maximum pressure. He had underestimated Elliot. Once he wouldn't make that mistake again. Lila, despite her fear, proved to be her father's daughter. When left alone briefly, she managed to hide her small butterfly hair clip, a gift from Elliot, behind a radiator. She remembered how her father had taught her to leave marks for rescuers to find. The hospital staff fought to stabilize Hannah, their efforts complicated by her body's rejection of standard treatments. Rebecca, maintaining a vigil by her bedside, fielded increasingly desperate calls from the search teams. Time was running out on multiple fronts. News crews descended on the neighborhood, drawn by the spectacle of the fire, but staying for the story of the missing girl. The community closed ranks, refusing to provide sound bites that could compromise the search. Their solidarity remained unbroken. Elliot stood at his office window, watching smoke rise from the direction of the bakery. His phone showed the bank transfer screen, cursor blinking over the confirm button. Everything he'd built, everything his father had built, balanced against one little girl's life. The kidnapper's professionalism suggested private security training, likely ex-military. The police seemed suspiciously slow to follow obvious leads. Robert's influence clearly reached deeper into city institutions than anyone had suspected. Maria and Carlos refused to leave the scene of the fire, watching their dreams turn to ash. But even in their devastation, they coordinated with other business owners, sharing security footage, comparing timelines. The pattern of professional sabotage became clear. At the hospital, Hannah briefly regained consciousness. "Find her," she whispered to Elliot, her faith in him unshaken despite everything. "Bring our daughter home," the word echoed in his heart as she slipped back into unconsciousness. The community's children, led by Lila's classmates, organized their own search network. They knew the neighborhood's hidden places, the shortcuts, the secret passages, the overlooked spaces where an adult might hide a scared little girl. Robert's ultimatum came with a deadline: midnight. The company or the child. The simple binary choice represented everything wrong with his worldview, the belief that everyone had a price. In the gathering darkness, the search parties regrouped at the community center. Exhausted but determined, they refused to give up. This wasn't just about finding one child anymore, it was about standing against the corruption that threatened their entire community. Lila's butterfly clip proved to be the breakthrough. A sharp-eyed volunteer spotted it during a systematic search of abandoned buildings near the financial district. The discovery narrowed the search area significantly, but time was running out. The bakery fire finally came under control, leaving behind a skeletal structure that seemed to mock the community's recent victories. But even as the embers cooled, neighbors were already planning the rebuilding, refusing to be broken. As the midnight deadline approached, Elliot faced the most crucial decision of his life. The company represented his father's legacy, his life's work, his redemption. But Lila represented something even more precious, the future: hope, love, unconditional and pure. In his darkest moment, Elliot remembered David Thompson's sacrifice on Brooklyn Bridge. Sometimes the most valuable things couldn't be measured in dollars or shares. Sometimes true worth lay in the courage to risk everything for what really mattered. The boardroom of Grayson Enterprises hummed with tension as Elliot burst through the doors, Rebecca and Mark Davis flanking him. Robert Langford stood at the head of the table, his presentation on the latest financial discrepancies interrupted mid-sentence. The gathered board members shifted uncomfortably, sensing the approaching storm. "It ends now," Robert Elliott's voice cut through the air like steel. He nodded to Mark, who began distributing thick folders to each board member. "Inside, you'll find evidence of systematic fraud spanning 2 decades. But more importantly, you'll find proof of Robert's involvement in my parents' death." Robert's composed facade cracked slightly. "This is absurd," he scoffed, but his hand trembled as he reached for the documents. "Mr. Grayson is clearly suffering another emotional breakdown. First the heart attack, now these paranoid delusions." "Tell them about the brake lines," Rebecca interrupted, her voice steady despite her emotions. "Tell them how you arranged the accident when Dad started questioning your creative accounting. Or shall I play the confession from the truck driver you paid off?" The boardroom erupted in murmurs as security footage played on the screen. Robert at the accident scene hours before he claimed to arrive, speaking with a man who would later be identified as the truck driver. Thomas Reed, the senior board member, removed his glasses in shock. "You were like a son to him," Elliot continued, his voice thick with controlled rage. "He trusted you to protect his family, his company, his legacy, and you betrayed him for profit." Robert's laugh was hollow. "Protect his legacy?" Thomas was weak, just like you've become. All this nonsense about community responsibility and ethical business practices. I made this company what it is. I turned it into a real power. Susan Miller stood up, her hands shaking but her voice firm. "I have the original financial records," she announced. "Every alteration, every manipulated report, every falsified transaction. I've been tracking them for months." Robert's face contorted with fury. "You stupid girl," he snarled. "I warned you what would happen if you crossed me. Your daughter's college fund, your mother's medical care." "That's enough," Thomas Reed's voice cracked like a whip. "Security, please escort Mr. Langford to my office. And contact the authorities." But Robert wasn't finished. "You want to talk about betrayal, Elliot? Tell them about the girl. Tell them how you're willing to sacrifice this company, your father's life's work, for some street urchin who reminds you of your guilty conscience." Elliot stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Lila Thompson is worth more than every dollar in this company's accounts. She showed me what my father tried to teach me, that true wealth isn't measured in profit margins. It's measured in lives touched, in communities strengthened, in people helped." The elevator doors dinged and Hannah Thompson entered, supported by Maria Sanchez. Though pale from her hospital stay, her presence commanded attention. "Tell them about David's report, Robert," she said quietly. "The one he filed about the brake tampering. The one that got him reassigned to bridge inspection, where you made sure he'd find trouble." The color drained from Robert's face. Behind Hannah, police officers appeared, led by Detective Sarah Martinez. "Robert Langford," she announced, "you're under arrest for the murders of Thomas and Margaret Grayson, conspiracy in the death of David Thompson, and multiple counts of financial fraud." As the officers approached, Robert made one last desperate play. "The girl dies at midnight if I don't make that call," he threatened. "Is your precious conscience worth her life, Elliot?" Elliot smiled, and for the first time Robert showed real fear. "You mean the call to the safe house on West 23rd Street? The one where Lila left us a trail to follow? She's already safe, Robert. Coach Peterson and his team got her out an hour ago." The fight seemed to drain from Robert as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The man who had manipulated and murdered his way to power for decades finally faced justice, brought down by the very community he had dismissed as worthless. Thomas Reed stood, addressing the board. "I move for an immediate vote to reinstate Elliot Grayson as CEO and to implement his proposed community investment initiatives in full." The vote was unanimous. As Robert was led away, Elliot turned to the board. "My father built this company on a simple principle that business should serve community, not prey upon it. Today we return to that vision." Hannah approached him, tears in her eyes. "Lila's asking for you," she said softly. "She wants to show you the drawing she made while she was waiting to be rescued. It's of our whole family, including you." The boardroom, usually a place of cold corporate decisions, filled with something new: hope, purpose, the possibility of redemption. Elliot looked at the faces around him: Rebecca, his sister and partner in justice Susan Miller, who risked everything for truth; Mark Davis, loyal through every challenge; and Hannah, who showed him the meaning of real strength. "The meeting is adjourned," he announced. "I have a date with my family at a certain bakery that needs rebuilding." As they left the corporate tower together, the sun broke through the clouds over Brooklyn. The community waited to celebrate not just Lila's rescue or Robert's arrest, but the triumph of something larger: the power of human connection over corporate greed, of love over fear, of community over isolation. The Grayson Enterprises logo still crowned the building, but its meaning had transformed. Like its CEO, it would now stand for something greater than profit. It would stand for the belief that business could be a force for good, that success could be measured in smiles as well as dollars, and that no one was beyond redemption if they found the courage to change. News of Lila's rescue and Robert's arrest spread through the Brooklyn neighborhood like wildfire. The community center, still smoky from its role as a command post during the search, filled with people bringing food, supplies, and most importantly, hope for the rebuilding effort ahead. Maria and Carlos Sanchez stood amid the ruins of their bakery, surrounded by neighbors wielding brooms, hammers, and determination. "We start again," Maria declared, her voice strong despite her tears. "Together we are stronger than any fire." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Mr. Chen's son, an architect, offered to draft new plans for free. Local contractors pledged their services at cost. Even competitors from neighboring districts reached out, offering their kitchens for temporary use until the bakery could reopen. Hannah, released from the hospital against medical advice, sat with Lila in the center of the activity. The little girl, showing remarkable resilience, had already turned her ordeal into a series of colorful drawings. "Look, Mommy," she pointed to one, "this is when all our friends came to save me. And this is Mr. Elliot taking down the bad man." The media descended on the neighborhood, hungry for the story of corporate corruption and community triumph. But instead of finding division and despair, they discovered something remarkable. Every resident they interviewed spoke of unity, of strength in connection, of the power of standing together. Coach Peterson organized the youth basketball team into a cleanup crew. Mrs. Harris coordinated a book drive to replace the library's damaged collection. The grocery store became a donation center, its aisles filled with supplies for affected families. The transformation of Grayson Enterprises made national headlines. Corporate giant returns to community roots. Interviews with employees revealed changes already taking place. Profit-sharing programs reinstated. Community investment initiatives launched. Small business support programs expanded. But the real story played out in smaller moments. Like when elderly Mrs. Rodriguez, who had lost everything in the fire, found her prized family recipes carefully preserved by neighbors who had rescued them from the flames. Or when local children presented Lila with a handmade crown, declaring her their brave princess. Elliot arrived at the community center to find Rebecca already there, sleeves rolled up, helping organize relief efforts. The siblings worked side by side, their bond stronger for having faced adversity together. "Dad would be proud," Rebecca said softly, watching the community in action. The small business coalition, far from being intimidated by recent events, grew stronger. Other neighborhoods reached out, seeking advice on forming their own alliances. What had started as a local resistance movement was becoming a model for community empowerment. Professional contractors arrived to find local teenagers already hard at work, supervised by Mr. Rodriguez from the auto shop. These kids, he explained proudly, they understand that rebuilding isn't just about buildings. It's about showing that we can't be broken. Hannah's nursing colleagues organized a health clinic in the community center, offering free checkups and care to those affected by stress and smoke inhalation. The line of volunteers wanting to help stretched around the block. Lila's school held a special assembly celebrating her bravery. Her classmates presented a project they'd worked on during her absence, a massive mural depicting the neighborhood's landmarks and the people who made it special. At the center, they'd painted the Sanchez Bakery, surrounded by holding hands. But the restoration efforts attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Other business leaders, inspired by Elliot's example, reached out to offer support. Corporate social responsibility wasn't just a buzzword anymore, it was becoming a movement. As evening fell, the community gathered in the park for a candlelight vigil. Not to mourn what was lost, but to celebrate what remained unbreakable: their bonds, their spirit, their determination to build something better from the ashes of adversity. Elliot stood with Hannah and Lila, watching the sea of flickering lights. Around them, voices raised in psalm, old hymns of hope and resistance, new anthems of unity and strength. The simple beauty of the moment brought tears to his eyes. Maria Sanchez took the makeshift stage, her voice trembling but clear. "Today we lost a building," she said, "but we found something more precious. We found that we are not just neighbors, we are family, and family rebuilds together." The announcement of the bakery's rebuilding fund drew gasps of surprise. Anonymous donations had poured in from across the city, matched dollar for dollar by Grayson Enterprises. But more touching were the small contributions: children's allowances, seniors' pension dollars, countless small acts of generosity adding up to something extraordinary. As the gathering continued, plans emerged for not just rebuilding but improving. The new bakery would include a community kitchen for teaching classes. The damaged buildings would be restored with green technology. The neighborhood would emerge stronger, more resilient, more united than ever. Lila fell asleep in Elliot's arms, exhausted but peaceful. Hannah leaned against him, their fingers intertwined. Around them, the community they'd helped forge continued its work of restoration and renewal. The stars emerged above Brooklyn, witnessing a neighborhood transformed not by crisis, but by the response to it. In the face of destruction, they had chosen to create. Against division, they had proven the power of unity. Beyond mere survival, they had discovered the strength to thrive. As the last candles flickered in the darkness, Elliot understood finally what his father had tried to teach him. True power wasn't in wealth or corporate influence, it was in the ability to bring people together, to build something larger than oneself, to create bonds that no force could break. The night air filled with promises of tomorrow, of rebuilding, of renewal, of a community rising stronger from adversity. And in that moment, surrounded by the family he'd found and the neighborhood he'd come to love, Elliot Grayson felt richer than he'd ever been in his life of wealth and isolation. The morning headline hit like a physical blow: Grayson Enterprises CEO under investigation, fraud and embezzlement allegations emerge. Robert's carefully orchestrated media campaign had struck with devastating precision, flooding news outlets with doctored evidence and carefully crafted lies. Elliot stood in his office, watching his empire crumble in real time. The stock price plummeted as investors panicked. Board members who had supported him hours ago now wouldn't take his calls. Security guards who had greeted him warmly every morning for years now avoided eye contact, treating him like a criminal. The accusations were comprehensive and devastating. Years of financial records had been manipulated to suggest systematic fraud. his recent involvement with the Brooklyn community was painted as a complex money laundering scheme. Even his relationship with Hannah and Lila was twisted into something sinister, a calculated move to gain sympathy and deflect suspicion. Mark Davis appeared in his doorway, face ashen. "They're freezing all your accounts," he reported quietly, "personal and corporate. The board has called an emergency meeting." There he hesitated. "They're voting on immediate removal." The speed of the fall was breathtaking. By noon, Elliot found himself escorted from the building he'd practically lived in for the past decade. Reporters swarmed the entrance, shouting questions. "Mr. Grayson, did you really embezzle millions from employee pension funds? Is it true you're using a low-income neighborhood for tax fraud? What about allegations of bribing city officials?" His phone buzzed constantly with messages from people rushing to distance themselves. Business partners cancelled meetings. Charity organizations removed his name from donor lists. Even his country club membership was suspended pending investigation. Rebecca fought desperately in the legal arena, but Robert's groundwork had been too thorough. Every attempt to prove the truth was met with another layer of fabricated evidence. The regulatory authorities, presented with seemingly irrefutable proof of wrongdoing, had no choice but to act. The personal hits were the hardest. Hannah's hospital received anonymous calls questioning the ethics of her treatment funding. Lila's school faced sudden scrutiny over donations linked to Grayson Enterprises. The Small Business Coalition members found themselves under investigation for alleged participation in a money laundering scheme. In the neighborhood, doubt began to creep in. Years of corporate betrayals had left deep scars, and some began to wonder if they'd been fooled again. Whispers spread. Had Elliot simply been playing a long game? Was their trust misplaced? The Sanchez Bakery, still rebuilding from the fire, received notice that their insurance claim was under review due to possible fraud. Mr. Chen's grocery store faced sudden health inspections. The community center's funding was frozen pending investigation. By evening, Elliot sat alone in his penthouse, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears. The same view that had once represented his success now felt like a mockery. His phone displayed missed calls from Hannah. He couldn't bring himself to answer, to hear doubt in her voice, or worse, unwavering faith he felt he no longer deserved. The television droned in the background, financial experts dissecting his fall with clinical detachment. His father's portrait seemed to watch him with disappointment. Though he knew the truth, he was finally becoming the man his father had wanted him to be, only to be destroyed by the very forces of greed and corruption he'd turned against. The final blow came in an email from the hospital's board of directors. Hannah's experimental treatment funding was suspended. Without it, her condition would deteriorate rapidly. The message was clear. Robert wasn't just attacking Elliot's business empire, he was systematically destroying everything and everyone Elliot cared about. As night fell over Manhattan, Elliot Grayson, who had once commanded one of the largest corporations in America, stood at his window, stripped of power, wealth, and influence. But in the reflection of the glass, he saw something his old self would never have recognized: a man who had finally found something worth fighting for, even if it cost him everything else. The question was no longer about saving his company or clearing his name. It was about protecting the community that had taught him the true meaning of wealth, the family that had shown him the real value of success. The only question was how to fight back when every weapon had been stripped away. Hannah's hospital room was eerily quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Without the experimental treatment, her condition had deteriorated rapidly. The lupus was attacking her organs, and traditional medications weren't enough to stop it. Lila sat beside her bed, drawing pictures that grew progressively darker in theme, no longer the bright, hopeful scenes of community and family, but shadowy illustrations of her fears. The community's suffering weighed heavily on Elliot as he watched through the hospital room window. The Sanchez Bakery remained closed, its insurance claim denied. Maria and Carlos had been forced to lay off their employees, many of whom had families depending on their income. The Small Business Coalition members faced mounting legal fees defending themselves against fraudulent investigations. Mrs. Harris had to close the library's after-school program due to frozen funds. Coach Peterson's youth basketball team couldn't afford to attend their championship game. Mr. Chen's grocery store struggled under the weight of repeated random health inspections. Each blow to the community felt like a personal failure. Lila's school life had become a nightmare. Other parents, fearful of the allegations surrounding Elliot, had instructed their children to avoid her. She sat alone at lunch, no longer the bright, confident child who had once saved a stranger on a bridge. Her teachers reported she had stopped participating in class, withdrawing into herself. Rebecca worked tirelessly on the legal defense, but the strain showed in her face. She'd been served with a Bar Association complaint, threatening her license over alleged ethical violations. Her own marriage was suffering under the pressure, her husband struggling to understand her unwavering loyalty to a brother she'd once been estranged from. Mark Davis, who had stood by Elliot through everything, faced criminal charges for alleged complicity in the fraud. His wife had taken their children to stay with relatives, afraid of being associated with the scandal. Yet he continued to work from his apartment, gathering evidence, refusing to abandon hope. The worst moment came when Hannah, in a brief period of lucidity, tried to reassure Elliot. "We still believe in you," she whispered, her voice weak but determined. No matter what they say, the fact that she was comforting him while fighting for her life broke something inside him. Lila crawled into his lap during one hospital visit, her small body trembling with suppressed tears. "The kids at school say you're a bad man," she confided. "But I told them you're like my daddy, you help people. I told them, but they won't listen." Her faith, unwavering despite everything, was both a blessing and a torture. The neighborhood that had once welcomed him now bore visible scars of his involvement. Graffiti appeared on walls Grayson agreed, and Trust No Suits windows that had once displayed Small Business Coalition signs now stood empty. The sense of community he'd helped rebuild was fracturing under the weight of suspicion and fear. At night, alone in his increasingly sparse apartment he'd been selling possessions to help fund the legal defense, Elliot was haunted by his father's words about responsibility and community. He had finally understood those lessons, only to watch helplessly as everything he tried to protect was systematically destroyed. Susan Miller, who had risked everything to help expose Robert's corruption, had been fired and blacklisted in the financial industry. Her daughter's college acceptance was rescinded after anonymous calls questioned the legitimacy of her application. The personal cost of loyalty was proving devastatingly high for everyone who stood by him. The community center, once vibrant with activity, stood quiet and half-empty. The children's laughter that had filled its halls was replaced by whispered conversations about betrayal and loss. The spirit that had defied corporate bullying seemed to be finally breaking under the weight of calculated character assassination. Every day brought new casualties in Robert's campaign of destruction, and every night Elliot watched Hannah's condition worsen, knowing that his failure to protect his newfound family and community might cost him everything that had given his life real meaning. The cemetery gates creaked in the pre-dawn darkness as Elliot made his way to his parents' grave. For the first time in 15 years, he knelt before the marble headstone, tears flowing freely down his face. The morning dew soaked through his worn suit pants. He'd sold his designer wardrobe to help fund Hannah's treatments. "I understand now, Dad," he whispered, touching the cold stone. "Everything you tried to teach me about business and community, I finally got it right," and now his voice broke. "Now everything's falling apart. I don't know how to fight this." The weight of recent events crushed down on him. Hannah's deteriorating condition, Lila's growing fear, the community's suffering, each thought was a fresh wound. The morning newspaper lay crumpled beside him, its headlines screaming about new allegations of criminal conspiracy. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with another text from Robert, ready to surrender yet. Every day you resist costs someone else their livelihood. The message was accompanied by a photo of Maria Sanchez packing up her baking equipment, defeat evident in her stooped shoulders. The sound of footsteps made him straighten, hastily wiping his eyes. But it was only the cemetery groundskeeper, old Mr. Patterson, who had known his father. "Your dad used to come here every morning," the old man said quietly. "Not to visit graves, but to walk among the living," said it reminded him what business was really about: serving people, not profits. Memories flooded back Sunday dinners with his parents, Rebecca's laughter, the pride in his father's eyes when he made his first ethical business decision. All of it lost to years of pursuing wealth over connection, power over purpose. Standing slowly, Elliot traced his mother's name on the headstone. She had maintained a small garden in their first office building, insisting that even in business, things needed to grow with care and patience. The garden had been one of the first things he'd removed during his modernization campaign. His phone rang Rebecca with news from the hospital. Hannah's latest tests showed further decline. The experimental treatment they'd pinned their hopes on was now permanently out of reach, the pharmaceutical company having withdrawn their support after anonymous pressure. The sky began to lighten, but Elliot felt darker than ever. He'd fought his way back from being the cold, isolated CEO, only to find that his redemption might cost everyone he'd grown to love. The price of his awakening was being paid by an entire community. A small voice behind him made him turn. "I thought I'd find you here." Lila stood in the cemetery dawn, looking impossibly young and vulnerable. She walked to him and took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his. "Mummy always says that when you're scared you should find your family. You're our family now, Mr. Elliot. You don't have to be alone anymore." The simple wisdom of her words broke through his despair. Yes, he was facing his darkest moment. Yes, the forces aligned against him seemed insurmountable. But he was no longer the solitary figure who had collapsed on Brooklyn Bridge. He had a family now, not just Hannah and Lila, but an entire community of people who had taught him the true meaning of wealth. Looking up at the brightening sky, Elliot squeezed Lila's hand gently. His father had built Grayson Enterprises on the principle that business should serve community. His mother had taught that growth required patience and care. But standing in the cemetery with his parents' memory and a child's unwavering faith, Elliot felt something stir in his heart, not hope exactly, but determination. He had lost his company, his reputation, his material wealth. But he still had the most valuable thing he'd ever possessed: the love of a family and a community worth fighting for. And perhaps that was all he really needed to start again. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Miller, a junior paralegal at Rebecca's firm, was reviewing archived security footage when she noticed something peculiar. In recordings from the night of Thomas and Margaret Grayson's accident, Robert Langford appeared in multiple locations at impossibly different times. The timestamps had been altered, she realized, her hands trembling as she pulled up file after file. But they forgot about the backup servers in the old building. Working through the night, Sarah uncovered a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading back 15 years. The evidence was damning. Security cameras had captured Robert meeting with the truck driver weeks before the accident. Phone records showed calls to a known professional saboteur. Most devastating of all was an email chain discussing Thomas Grayson's growing suspicions about financial irregularities. But meanwhile, in a dusty storage unit across town, Mark Davis made his own discovery. Hidden among old company records was a leather-bound journal, Thomas Grayson's private business diary. The final entries detailed his investigation into Robert's embezzlement scheme and his plans to confront his old friend. The journal's last entry, dated the day before the accident, was chilling. "Robert has betrayed not just me, but everything this company stands for. Tomorrow I'll present the board with evidence of his crimes. Margaret worries it's too dangerous, but I must do what's right." Rebecca, reviewing her father's findings, found a connection no one had noticed before. The trucking company responsible for her parents' accident had been secretly acquired by one of Robert's shell corporations just weeks before the crash. The same pattern appeared in David Thompson's death years later. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had never been satisfied with the original accident investigation, reopened the case. With fresh evidence and modern forensic techniques, she uncovered what had been overlooked or deliberately hidden years ago. The brake lines hadn't just failed, they'd been expertly compromised. The truck driver, now living luxuriously in South America, had received regular payments from an offshore account traced back to Robert. The original investigator had been pressured to close the case prematurely. But the most shocking revelation came from Hannah's hospital room. As she sorted through David's old papers, trying to keep her mind off her worsening condition, she found a sealed envelope addressed to the next person who asks questions. Inside was a detailed report of brake tampering on the Graysons' vehicle, complete with photographs and technical analysis. David had discovered the truth during his inspection, but had been threatened into silence. His transfer to bridge inspection wasn't a coincidence, it was punishment for his investigation. The evidence mounted rapidly. Former employees came forward with stories of intimidation. Security guards remembered unusual late-night meetings. Its specialists recalled being ordered to delete specific records. But Susan Miller, working from her daughter's college dorm room since losing her job, pieced together the financial side of Robert's schemes. Years of systematic fraud, hidden behind a maze of shell companies and falsified reports, all designed to enrich himself while undermining Thomas Grayson's ethical business practices. The final piece fell into place when Rebecca discovered a hidden safe in Robert's office, missed in the initial investigation. Inside was a USB drive containing his personal records, a trophy collection of his crimes, kept as insurance against potential betrayals. He documented everything Rebecca whispered, scrolling through the files. Every murder, every fraud, every act of corruption. He was proud of it. The drive even contained plans for his recent campaign against Elliot, showing how thoroughly he had orchestrated the community's suffering. For Elliot, reading his father's journal brought both pain and clarity. Thomas had seen the danger Robert posed not just to the company, but to the very idea that business could be both profitable and ethical. His last acts had been to protect that vision. As the evidence was compiled and verified, a clear picture emerged. Robert Langford hadn't just killed Thomas and Margaret Grayson to hide his crimes. He had spent decades systematically destroying everything they had built, corrupting their legacy while pretending to protect it. The truth, so long buried under layers of deception and fear, was finally coming to light. The question now was how to use it, not just to clear Elliot's name, but to restore his father's vision and heal the community that had suffered in the crossfire of Robert's ambition. The federal agents arrived at Robert Langford's mansion just before dawn. They found him attempting to destroy documents, his carefully maintained composure finally shattered. As he was led away in handcuffs, his empire of lies crumbling around him, he caught sight of Elliot watching from the street. The arrest made national headlines. Corporate conspiracy exposed decades of fraud and murder. Uncovered news channels ran constant coverage of Robert being escorted into the federal courthouse, his designer suit replaced by prison orange. The same media outlets that had condemned Elliot now scrambled to tell the true story. Detective Martinez held a press conference detailing the evidence of Robert's involvement in the Graysons' death. This was no accident, she stated firmly. This was a calculated murder designed to silence those who stood for ethical business practices. Behind her, screens displayed the technical evidence of brake tampering and the money trail leading to Robert. The regulatory authorities moved swiftly. Grayson Enterprises accounts were unfrozen. The board of directors, many of whom had abandoned Elliot in the crisis, now faced their own investigations for complicity in Robert's schemes. Thomas Reed, the senior board member, offered a public apology for doubting Elliot's integrity. Hannah's experimental treatment was immediately reinstated, funded by the recovered assets from Robert's hidden accounts. The hospital board issued a formal apology for their role in suspending her care. Within days, her condition began to improve under the renewed treatment protocol. The Small Business Coalition members were fully cleared of all allegations. Insurance payments were expedited for the Sanchez Bakery. The community center's funding was restored and increased. Mr. Chen's grocery store received compensation for the harassment disguised as inspections. In the courthouse, Robert finally faced justice. As the evidence mounted financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, obstruction of justice, his carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. When confronted with David Thompson's hidden report about the brake tampering, he broke down and confessed everything. The judge's sentence was severe life imprisonment without possibility of parole. "You didn't just commit financial crimes," she declared. "You destroyed families, corrupted institutions, and betrayed the fundamental trust that allows business to serve society rather than prey upon it." Susan Miller was reinstated at Grayson Enterprises with a promotion and full compensation for her ordeal. Her daughter's college acceptance was reconfirmed with a full scholarship. Mark Davis returned as Chief Operating Officer, his reputation not just cleared but enhanced by his loyalty during the crisis. The neighborhood celebrated with a street festival outside the newly rebuilt Sanchez Bakery. Children played freely again, parents relaxed their vigilance, and the sense of community that Robert had tried to destroy emerged stronger than ever. Lila's classmates, understanding finally that they had been wrong about Elliot, created a special card apologizing for their treatment of her. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Rebecca discovered one final piece of evidence, a video recording their father had made the night before his death. In it, Thomas Grayson spoke directly to his children about his hopes for the company's future. "Business isn't just about profits," he said, his image slightly grainy but his conviction clear. "It's about building something that makes the world better. That's what I hope you'll understand someday." Watching the video together, Elliot and Rebecca held hands, tears flowing freely as they realized they had finally fulfilled their father's dream. The justice system worked swiftly to dismantle Robert's network of corruption. His accomplices were arrested, his hidden assets seized, his decades of manipulation exposed to public scrutiny. But the true victory wasn't just in punishment, it was in restoration. As Robert began his life sentence, Elliot stood in his father's old office, now restored to its original warmth. The garden his mother had loved was being replanted. The company was returning to its founding principles. And most importantly, the community that had taught him the true meaning of wealth was healing, growing stronger through adversity. Justice had been served, not just in the courts, but in the restoration of faith, community, and the belief that business could be a force for good in the world. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Hannah's hospital room as her doctors delivered the news the experimental treatment was working. Her condition had stabilized, then begun to improve. Lila, curled up in Elliot's lap, drew pictures of sunshine and flowers, her artistic optimism restored along with her mother's health. The transformation in their lives was profound. Hannah's strength returned gradually, color replacing the pallor in her cheeks. Lila's nightmares about bad men taking her away faded, replaced by dreams of family and future. The shadow that had hung over their small unit lifted, allowing something new to bloom. In the neighborhood, healing took physical form. The Sanchez Bakery reopened with an expanded kitchen and community space. Mr. Chen's grocery store thrived, now offering cooking classes for local youth. The library's after-school program resumed with enhanced funding, and Coach Peterson's basketball team not only made it to their championship, but won. Rebecca moved her legal practice to a small office above the bakery, focusing on community advocacy and corporate accountability. She and Elliot spent long hours together, making up for lost years, sharing memories of their parents, and planning ways to protect other communities from corporate predation. The Small Business Coalition became a model for other neighborhoods. Delegations from across the city visited to learn how local businesses could band together effectively. Maria Sanchez, now a respected community leader, often gave presentations about resilience and unity in the face of corporate pressure. Elliot's own transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. The man who had once measured success in profit margins now found joy in simple moments, helping Lila with homework, sharing morning coffee with Hannah, joining community meetings where everyone's voice counted equally. His father's office, restored to its original warmth, became a place of connection rather than isolation. The walls, once covered in financial charts, now displayed community artwork, including several of Lila's drawings. The conference room hosted local business meetings, youth mentoring sessions, and family gatherings. One evening, as he helped close the bakery, Carlos Sanchez offered the wisdom of experience. "You know what makes a man rich, Elliot? Not money in the bank, but love in the heart and purpose in the soul." Looking around at the community he'd come to cherish, Elliot understood completely. The pinnacle of personal redemption came unexpectedly. During a quiet dinner at Hannah's apartment, Lila presented him with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a hand-decorated frame containing her family drawing, but this time she'd written Daddy under his figure. Hannah, watching with tears in her eyes, took his hand. "She's right, you know," she said softly. "You become so much more than we ever expected. You're not just the man who helped save our community, you're the man who became our family." The corporate world noticed the changes too. Business schools began studying the Grayson model of ethical community engagement. Other companies, seeing the success of balancing profit with social responsibility, started their own community investment programs. But for Elliot, the real measure of redemption wasn't in professional recognition. It was in the trust of a child who had once saved his life and now called him father. It was in the love of a woman who had shown him the meaning of strength and dignity. It was in the respect of a community that had taught him the true value of wealth. One morning, visiting his parents' grave with Hannah and Lila, Elliot felt a deep sense of peace. The garden around the headstone, tended now by community volunteers, bloomed with his mother's favorite flowers. His father's business principles, once forgotten in the pursuit of profit, lived on in the transformed company. "Your daddy would be proud," Hannah said softly, squeezing his hand. Lila placed a drawing against the headstone, a picture of their entire extended family, including grandparents she had never met but whose legacy she helped honor. In that moment, surrounded by the love he had nearly lost himself to find, Elliot Grayson understood that true redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future worthy of those who had shown him the way. The autumn sun painted Brooklyn in shades of gold as hundreds gathered for the dedication of David Thompson Memorial Park. What had once been a neglected lot now bloomed with gardens, playgrounds, and community spaces. A bronze statue of David, captured in his moment of heroism, stood at the center, one hand reaching out to help, just as he had lived his life. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, each designed by local children under Lila's artistic direction. The Sanchez bakery had provided an abundance of fresh pastries, their warm aroma mixing with the crisp fall air. Community members moved through the crowd, sharing stories of David and the neighborhood's transformation. Hannah stood at the podium, her health fully restored, her presence commanding respect. "This park represents more than one man's sacrifice," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "It represents the power of community, the strength of unity, and the belief that one person's actions can change countless lives." Lila sat in the front row between Elliot and Rebecca, proudly wearing the dress she had chosen specially for the occasion. Around her neck hung a small pendant containing a photo of her father, a gift from Elliot that morning. Her eyes shone with pride as her mother spoke about David's legacy. Coach Peterson's youth basketball team, wearing new uniforms donated by Grayson Enterprises, demonstrated their skills on the freshly installed court. Mrs. Harris had organized a reading corner where children gathered to hear stories about local heroes. Mr. Chen's family had set up a refreshment station offering traditional recipes passed down through generations. The park's design incorporated elements from every part of the community. The playground equipment, suggested by local children, included adaptive features for differently abled kids. The community garden plots, inspired by Margaret Grayson's love of growing things, were already producing vegetables for the neighborhood food bank. When Elliot took the podium, he carried not just his prepared speech but the weight of transformation. 5 months ago he began, "I was a different man. I measured success in dollars and deals. Then a little girl saved my life on a bridge, and in doing so saved my soul." His eyes met Lila's, who beamed back at him. The dedication plaque, unveiled with ceremony, bore an inscription that brought tears to many eyes in memory of David Thompson, who taught us that true heroism lies not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of kindness and courage. May this park serve as a reminder that every hand extended in help creates ripples of hope through generations. Maria Sanchez, speaking on behalf of the Small Business Coalition, announced the establishment of the David Thompson Memorial Scholarship, designed to support local youth pursuing careers in community service. The first recipient would be chosen the following spring, with Lila serving on the Junior Selection Committee. The ceremony culminated in a moment of profound symbolism. As the sun began to set, community members lit lanterns, one for each life David had touched, one for each person who had contributed to the park's creation, one for each story of hope and resilience that had brought them to this moment. Hannah and Elliot stood together, watching Lila release her lantern into the darkening sky. The light caught the tears on her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Daddy would love this," she whispered, slipping her hands into theirs. He always said parks were like hugs from the whole neighborhood. The evening air filled with music as local musicians began to play. Children darted between the lantern-lit paths, their laughter echoing off the new buildings. Elderly residents shared benches with young families, passing down neighborhood stories to the next generation. Rebecca, watching her brother with their newfound family, saw in him the man their father had always hoped he would become. The park wasn't just a memorial to David Thompson, it was a testament to the power of transformation, a symbol of what could happen when business served community rather than dominated it. As night fell over Brooklyn, the park glowed with warmth and life. The bronze statue of David Thompson stood sentinel over the scene, his outstretched hand eternally offering help, eternally teaching the lesson that had changed so many lives, that true wealth lay not in what you possessed, but in what you gave to others. 3 months after the park dedication, Elliot stood in the master bathroom of his new Brooklyn brownstone, adjusting his bow tie with nervous fingers. The house, just 2 blocks from Hannah's apartment and walking distance from the bakery, represented his complete integration into the community he'd grown to love. "Need help with that?" Hannah appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a simple white dress. Her eyes sparkled with health and happiness, all traces of her illness gone. Today wasn't just any Saturday, it was their wedding day, a small ceremony planned in David Thompson Memorial Park. Lila burst in, already wearing her flower girl dress, a crown of daisies perched on her dark curls. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong," she declared, making both adults laugh. The word daddy still filled Elliot's heart with joy every time she said it, a reminder of how far they'd all come. The ceremony location had been Lila's idea. "It's perfect," she had insisted. "Daddy David can watch from his statue, and everyone in the neighborhood can celebrate with us the wisdom of children," Elliot had learned, often surpassed adult logic. Rebecca, now living in the brownstone next door with her reconciled husband, had helped plan the intimate celebration. The Sanchez Bakery was providing the cake, Mr. Chen's family had arranged the flowers, and Coach Peterson's basketball team had volunteered as ushers. The transformation of Grayson Enterprises continued in parallel with these personal changes. The company had established a significant community development fund, supporting small businesses and local initiatives across the city. Profits remained strong, but they now measured success in lives improved rather than just dollars earned. Hannah Hannah's medical practice had evolved too. With support from Grayson Enterprises, she now ran a clinic providing care to underserved communities. Her experience with lupus had made her particularly attuned to patients struggling with chronic conditions and limited resources. Before heading to the park, the small family stood together in their new kitchen. Lila presented them with her latest masterpiece, a drawing of their family tree that included everyone: David Thompson watching from heaven, Thomas and Margaret Grayson smiling down, and their entire extended community as branches and leaves. "See," she explained, pointing to the golden lines connecting everyone. "We're all part of the same tree now. The roots are love, and the branches are hope, and the leaves are all the people we help." Her childish wisdom brought tears to both adults' eyes. The kitchen window offered a view of the park where, in a few hours, they would formalize what their hearts already knew: that love could heal the deepest wounds, that family wasn't limited by blood, and that true wealth lay in the connections we forge with others. On the counter sat Hannah's wedding gift to Elliot, David's old rescue worker badge, mounted alongside a photo of David and a young Lila. The inscription read to the man who learned to save others in his own way: "Welcome to our family." Elliot's gift to Hannah was equally meaningful, a key to a new community health center being built adjacent to the park, where her dream of accessible healthcare for all would become reality. The center would bear both David's name and his spirit of service. As they prepared to leave for the ceremony, Lila tugged at Elliot's sleeve. "You know what, Daddy," she said thoughtfully. "That day on the bridge, I think Daddy David helped me find you. He always knew who needed help the most." Hannah squeezed Elliot's hand, understanding the emotion that made speech impossible. Together, they had built something beautiful from loss and pain: a family bound by choice rather than obligation, a community strengthened by compassion rather than competition. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the simple gold band already on Hannah's finger. Her engagement ring had been David's, given with love from one protector of her heart to another. Today they would add another ring, another layer to their story of healing and hope. 5 years later, the annual Community Unity Festival filled the streets around David Thompson Memorial Park. Children played on equipment worn smooth by love and use, while their parents shared stories on benches dedicated to neighborhood heroes. The Sanchez Bakery, now a local chain of community-focused cafes, served their famous pastries from a dozen stalls. Elliot stood on the small stage, Hannah by his side, watching Lila receive the first graduation certificate from the Thompson Grayson Youth Leadership Program. At 13, she had grown into a remarkable young woman, carrying both her father's spirits of service and compassion. Today, Elliot addressed the gathered crowd. "We celebrate not just our community's strength, but the power of transformation. 5 years ago, I was a man who measured wealth in dollars. Today, I measure it in smiles, in helping hands, in lives touched and hearts healed." The Small Business Coalition, now a model studied by cities worldwide, had grown to support hundreds of local enterprises. But its heart remained in this Brooklyn neighborhood, where business owners still gathered in the bakery's upstairs room to discuss ways of strengthening their community. Grayson Enterprises had evolved into something Thomas would have been proud to see. Its board now included community representatives, its profits supported social initiatives, and its business practices proved that ethics and success could coexist. Rebecca, as chief legal counsel, ensured the company never strayed from its renewed mission. Hannah's Community Health Center had become a beacon of hope, providing care regardless of ability to pay. The waiting room walls displayed children's artwork alongside photographs of David Thompson, reminding visitors that every act of service created ripples of positive change. "The truth is," Elliot continued, his voice carrying across the festival, "real wealth isn't found in penthouse views or corporate towers. It's found in the courage to change, the strength to trust, and the wisdom to recognize that we're all connected in this great web of community." The crowd included faces both familiar and new. Mr. Chen's daughter, now running the family store, stood beside her father. Coach Peterson's basketball team, state champions 3 years running, wore uniforms bearing both the Grayson logo and David Thompson's badge number. Maria Sanchez, her hair now streaked with gray, wiped tears as she remembered the day Elliot first walked into her bakery. Who would have thought, she whispered to Carlos, that one man's change of heart could transform so many lives? The festival culminated in the now traditional lantern release. But this year, Lila had added something new. Each lantern carried a message of hope written by a community member. As the lights rose into the evening sky, they carried dreams of unity, stories of resilience, and promises of continued support for one another. Hannah slipped her hand into Elliot's as they watched the lanterns ascend. Their simple gold wedding bands caught the light, symbols of a love built on understanding, forgiveness, and shared purpose. Their free hands held Lila's, completing the circle of their unique family. "You see," Lila told a group of younger children gathered around her, "sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, and sometimes the richest people are the ones who give the most away. That's what both my dads taught me." The message was clear to all who witnessed this community's journey. True wealth couldn't be measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It lived in the connections between people, in the strength of shared purpose, in the courage to reach out to others in need. As night fell over Brooklyn, the park glowed with lantern light and human warmth. The bronze statue of David Thompson stood witness to his legacy, not just of one heroic act, but of the endless ripples of positive change that flow from every choice to help others, to build community, to believe in the power of transformation. For in the end, this wasn't just a story about one man's redemption or one community's resilience. It was a reminder that every life touched creates possibilities for change, that every hand extended in help can transform both giver and receiver, and that the truest measure of wealth is the love we share and the lives we lift along our journey. Thank you for experiencing this emotional journey with us. If this story touched your heart and resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. What moments moved you the most? Has someone's kindness ever transformed your life? Please share our message of hope and redemption with your friends and family who might need it today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to support our team in creating more meaningful stories that remind us of the power of human connection and the true meaning of wealth. Together, we can spread more stories that matter.